My name is Jessica Miller, and I'm 28 years old. As a graphic designer with dreams bigger than my bank account, I never expected the annual Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' luxurious Boston suburban home to change my life forever. The house buzzed with family members whose success overshadowed my modest creative career. I arrived with hope that this year would be different, that my family might finally see the value in my passion. Little did I know, Grandpa William had been hiding a truth that would silence every mocking voice at that table. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you've ever felt misunderstood by family, hit that subscribe button as I take you through the dinner that changed everything. The crisp November air nipped at my cheeks as I walked up the cobblestone pathway to my parents' colonial-style mansion. The three-story home with its pristine white columns and manicured hedges screamed old money and success. Two things my parents valued above all else. I clutched my homemade pumpkin pie, the glass dish still warm against my fingertips. My car, a used Volkswagen with peeling paint, looked embarrassingly out of place next to the lineup of luxury vehicles in the circular driveway. I took a deep breath, watching it form a small cloud in the cold air. This was my family, for better or worse, and I'd endure another Thanksgiving dinner of subtle jabs and disappointed glances. I rang the doorbell, hearing the familiar chime echo through the house. My mother, Diane, answered the door. At 55, she looked 45, her blonde hair perfectly highlighted, her face taut from expensive treatments, her navy blue dress likely costing more than my monthly rent. "Jessica, darling, you're here." She air-kissed both my cheeks, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "And you're wearing that." Her eyes flicked over my vintage dress and ankle boots, a slight frown crossing her features before she masked it with a practiced smile. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom," I said, offering the pie. "I made dessert." "How crafty of you." She accepted it with 2 fingers, as if it might contaminate her manicure. "Everyone's in the living room. Your brother just told us about his promotion." Of course he had. Michael, my older brother by 3 years, had followed our father's footsteps into investment banking. He was the golden child, Harvard Business School graduate, 6-figure salary, perfect wife, perfect house, perfect life. I stepped into the grand foyer with its crystal chandelier and marble floors, feeling immediately underdressed despite having worn my nicest outfit. Family portraits line the walls, strategic documentation of our achievements. Michael's graduation, Michael's wedding, Michael receiving awards. The few with me were from childhood, before my decision to pursue art had disappointed everyone. In the living room, my father Robert held court. At 60, his hair had grayed at the temples, giving him a distinguished look that served him well in boardrooms. He was mid-story about some business deal when he spotted me. "There she is," he announced, interrupting himself. "The artist has arrived." The room turned to me. My brother Michael stood by the fireplace, whiskey in hand, his arm around his wife Amanda, a pediatrician with perfect posture and pearls. Aunt Susan, my mother's older sister and successful realtor, sat with her husband Uncle Tom, some high-level executive at a tech company. Their 3 children, my cousins, were scattered around the room, all working in fields my parents deemed respectable: law, medicine, finance. And then there was Grandpa William, my father's father, sitting quietly in the corner armchair. At 88, he remained sharp-minded and observant. His eyes, bright blue like mine, crinkled as he smiled genuinely at me. Unlike the others, his welcome felt warm and real. "Jessica, sweetie," he called, his voice stronger than his frame suggested. "Come give your old grandpa a hug." I crossed the room, aware of evaluating eyes on me, and leaned down to embrace him. He smelled of peppermint and old books. "Don't let them get to you," he whispered in my ear before releasing me. The next hour was a carefully choreographed dance of small talk and showing interest in everyone else's accomplishments. I listened to Michael detail his promotion, Amanda discuss her pediatric practice, and my cousins compete over who had the most impressive recent achievement. When Aunt Susan finally turned to me with, "And what about you, Jessica? Still doing those little drawings?" I saw my opening. Actually, I just won the Regional Design Excellence Award for my work with that sustainable clothing brand I mentioned last year. They've expanded to 3 more stores, and my packaging design has been featured in. Speaking of clothing, my mother interrupted, Amanda, where did you get that beautiful blouse? Is that the new collection from Nordstrom? Just like that, my achievement evaporated into the air, deemed unworthy of acknowledgement. I caught Grandpa William's eye across the room. He gave me a small, sad smile and a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. This wasn't new. When I was 7, I'd spent weeks creating a watercolor painting for the school art show. While other parents praised their children's work, mine had simply asked why I hadn't participated in the math competition instead. When I'd chosen art school over the business program my father had selected, they'd barely spoken to me for months. My decision to pursue graphic design was tolerated only because it occasionally intersected with the corporate world they understood. Dinner's ready, my mother announced, saving me from my thoughts. Everyone to the dining room. As we moved toward the formal dining room, Michael slapped my shoulder. Hey, congrats on your Arts and Crafts Award, Jess. Maybe next year you can make macaroni art and really impress us. He laughed, and so did everyone within earshot, except Grandpa William. I plastered on a smile, determined not to let them see how much their dismissal hurt. I'd build my life on my own terms, even if they never understood its value. Thanks, Mike. And congrats on your promotion. Dad must be thrilled you're following his exact footsteps. My tone was light, but Michael's smile tightened. He confessed to me once, after too many beers in college, that he'd wanted to study music. That dream had been quickly squashed under our father's expectations. As we took our seats at the massive oak dining table, placed according to my mother's careful consideration of status and favor, I found myself between Amanda and one of my cousins, directly across from Aunt Susan and Uncle Tom. Grandpa William sat at the far end, opposite my father at the head of the table. The table was a showcase of my mother's entertaining skills: fine china, crystal glasses, silver candelabras, and a floral centerpiece that probably cost more than I made in a week. The perfect setting for the perfect family image she worked so hard to maintain. If only they knew how empty it all felt to me. The dining room gleamed under the soft light of the crystal chandelier. Steam rose from silver serving dishes filled with traditional Thanksgiving fare, a golden brown turkey carved with surgical precision, cranberry sauce that held the shape of the can it came from, mashed potatoes whipped to perfection, green bean casserole with crispy onions, sweet potato casserole topped with browned marshmallows, and stuffing made from my grandmother's recipe, the only dish my mother didn't outsource to her caterer. Jessica, would you like to place your contribution with the other desserts? My mother gestured to the sideboard where store-bought pies with bakery labels sat in elegant formation. I placed my homemade pumpkin pie among them, its slightly lopsided crust immediately apparent next to the professional offerings. Uncle Tom glanced at it and raised an eyebrow. Well, it certainly looks homemade, he said with a chuckle that others around the table echoed. I think it's great Jessica brought something she made herself, Amanda said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension reserved for praising a child's finger painting. We took our seats as my father carved the turkey with ceremonial precision. Plates were passed, wine was poured, and the performance of the perfect family dinner commenced. So, Michael, my father began, predictably, tell everyone about the Johnson account. That was quite the coup. Michael launched into a detailed explanation of some business deal that had apparently impressed important people. The table listened with rapt attention as he described numbers and strategies that made everyone nod appreciatively. When he finished, there were questions, congratulations, and knowing comments about his bright future. That's my boy, Dad said proudly. At this rate, you'll make partner before you're 35. And then maybe you two can finally start thinking about giving us grandchildren, Mom added, smiling at Amanda, who nodded on cue. The conversation flowed from Michael's career to Amanda's work with underprivileged children, just the right amount of charity to seem compassionate without sacrificing income, to my cousins' various achievements in their respected professions. I ate silently, pushing food around my plate and taking generous sips of wine. Grandpa William caught my eye occasionally, offering small smiles of solidarity from his end of the table. Finally, inevitably, the spotlight turned to me. "Jessica," my mother began in that concerned tone I knew all too well, "your father and I were talking the other day about your situation." I braced myself. My situation? "Well, darling, you're approaching 30. Don't you think it's time to consider something more substantial? Your little design projects are creative, of course, but there's no security there. No retirement plan." Before I could respond, my father jumped in. "As a matter of fact, our marketing department has an opening. Nothing fancy to start, but it would get your foot in the door of a real company. Benefits, 401k, the works. Dad, I have a real job. I work with real companies. I just told you about the award I won." "Honey," my mother interrupted, "awards don't pay mortgages. You're renting that tiny apartment, driving that old car, which runs perfectly fine. And what about healthcare?" Aunt Susan chimed in. "Do you even have insurance?" "Yes, I have insurance through the Freelancers Union," I said, feeling my face grow hot. "And I'm building a client base of sustainable businesses that align with my values." Michael snorted into his wine glass. "Values don't pay bills, Jess." "Actually, living according to my values is exactly why I do what I do," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not everyone measures success by the size of their paycheck." "That's such a convenient philosophy for someone who doesn't make much money," Uncle Tom said with a laugh that others joined. "Jessica, we're just concerned," my mother continued. "At your age, I was already established in my law practice. Your father was making his mark at the firm. We had a home stability. And you had the advantage of family connections and financial support," I pointed out. "Dad's firm was Grandpa's firm first. Your law school was paid for by your parents." A tense silence fell over the table. "We worked hard for everything we have," my father said, his voice tight. "I know you did," I conceded. "But you also had advantages I don't have because I chose a different path, a path none of you support." "We would support any path that showed promise," my mother said. "If you were advancing in your career, making connections, building something substantial." "I am building something," I insisted. "Just because it doesn't look like what you value doesn't mean it lacks worth." Feeling the conversation becoming too heated, I excused myself to the bathroom. In the powder room's pristine silence, I stared at my reflection in the gold-framed mirror. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright with unshed tears. I took several deep breaths, splashed cold water on my face, and reminded myself that their opinions couldn't define my worth unless I let them. When I returned to the table, the conversation had moved on to my cousin's law firm merger. I picked at my cooling food, feeling both relieved and frustrated that my career discussion had been so easily discarded. Throughout this exchange, Grandpa William had remained silent, watching with those observant blue eyes. He seemed to be taking mental notes, his gaze moving from speaker to speaker with quiet intensity. Occasionally, he would catch my eye and give me a slight nod, as if to say, "I hear you," even if they don't. The meal continued, tension simmering beneath polite conversation. I answered questions about my work with brief responses, knowing any enthusiasm would be met with patronizing smiles or concerned glances. I'd performed this dance too many times before. As the main course plates were cleared and dessert preparations began, I steeled myself for the next round of subtle jabs and not-so-subtle suggestions about my life choices. The worst was yet to come, though I couldn't have imagined just how dramatically this dinner would end. My mother emerged from the kitchen carrying a silver tray of coffee cups, while my father opened a bottle of expensive dessert wine. The array of pies was arranged on the dining table: pecan, apple, chocolate silk, and my homemade pumpkin pie, conspicuously less perfect than its store-bought companions. "Who's ready for dessert?" Mom asked with hostess perfection. "Jessica made the pumpkin pie. The others are from Magnolia Bakery." Uncle Tom helped himself to a slice of my pie, examining it with theatrical scrutiny. "Well, let's see what our little artist has created in the culinary world." He took a bite, nodding with exaggerated surprise. Not bad at all. Though I suppose if the design career doesn't pan out, you could always fall back on baking." He laughed at his own joke, and others joined in. She'd have to improve quite a bit to compete with professional bakers, Aunt Susan added, gesturing toward the perfect lattice on the apple pie. Speaking of careers, my mother said, seizing the opening, did I tell you about Caroline Weber's daughter? She went to art school too. She and Jessica took classes together, remember? Well, she's a dental hygienist now. Just bought a lovely condo in Cambridge. Mom, Stephanie was in one drawing class with me. She switched majors in our sophomore year. Still, my mother continued as if I hadn't spoken. She recognized when to make a practical choice. Such a smart girl. My father nodded sagely. It's never too late to make a sensible decision about your future, Jessica. Michael pulled out his phone, tapping the screen with a mischievous grin. Remember Jessica's experimental phase in college? I found these photos the other day while backing up my cloud storage. He passed his phone around the table. Everyone erupted in laughter as they viewed what I already knew were pictures from my junior year art installation. An admittedly avant-garde piece involving mannequins and projected light that had actually won the department's Innovation Award. Out of context, displayed on a tiny phone screen to people who didn't understand conceptual art, it looked absurd. What were you even trying to do here? One of my cousins asked between laughs. It was an exploration of how society projects expectations onto blank human forms, I explained, knowing my words would fall on deaf ears. It was actually selected for. Remember her middle school phase when she would only wear black? Aunt Susan interrupted. She went around quoting Sylvia Plath and drawing those disturbing sketches. Or her high school obsession with street art, my mother added. She nearly got arrested for trying to paint a mural on the side of the community center. I had permission from the Arts Council, I corrected. Dad just didn't bother to read the paperwork before he came to pick me up. The tie-dye business in elementary school was my favorite, Michael chimed in. She tried selling tie-dyed socks to classmates and came home crying when no one bought any. I was 9, I said flatly. The table erupted in another round of laughter. Each family member seemed eager to contribute to the Jessica's Failed Artistic Ventures anthology, sharing stories that painted me as a naive dreamer who never learned her lesson. Remember when she thought she'd be the next Andy Warhol? Uncle Tom guffawed. Or when she turned down that marketing internship to work at that failing indie magazine, my father added. What was it called again? Michael asked. Perspective, I said quietly. And it wasn't failing. It was a startup that got acquired the following year. No one acknowledged my correction. They were too busy enjoying the communal mockery, the comfortable solidarity of being on the right side of life's choices while I remained stubbornly, foolishly on the wrong side. The point is, my mother said, placing her hand over mine in a gesture of false compassion, we've watched you struggle with this art thing for years, Jessica. We've supported you. How? I interrupted, unable to contain myself any longer. How exactly have you supported me? By belittling my choices? By dismissing my achievements? By making me the family cautionary tale? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Now, Jessica, my father said sternly, there's no need for dramatics. We're having a pleasant family dinner. Pleasant for whom? I asked, my voice trembling. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family gathering, I become the designated target. You all sit around sharing your promotions and bonuses and vacations homes, and then unite in collective concern over poor Jessica, who still thinks she can make a living being creative. We're concerned because we love you, my mother insisted. No, I said, standing up so suddenly my chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. You're concerned because I make you uncomfortable. I remind you that there are different definitions of success, different ways to live a meaningful life. And that terrifies you because it suggests you might have sacrificed parts of yourselves unnecessarily. Michael scoffed. That's ridiculous. We're just trying to help you see reality. Your reality, I corrected. Not mine. I looked around the table at the faces of my family, some shocked, some angry, some embarrassed by my outburst. My chest felt tight, my eyes burning with tears I refused to shed. I think I should go, I said, placing my napkin beside my half-eaten pie. Just as I turned to leave, a sharp, rhythmic tapping cut through the tension. Everyone turned toward the sound. At the far end of the table, Grandpa William was deliberately tapping his dessert spoon against his crystal water glass. The clear, ringing sound commanded attention as effectively as a shout would have. When all eyes were on him, he set down the spoon with precise movement. In the 30 years I'd known him, I'd never seen him interrupt a family dinner. Grandpa had always been the quiet observer, the gentle presence who offered wisdom only when directly asked. But something in his face had changed. His usual kindly expression had hardened into something resolute, almost stern. His bright blue eyes, the same shade as mine, swept across the table with unexpected authority. "I believe," he said in a voice stronger than I'd heard from him in years, "that it's time we had a different conversation." The dining room fell silent. Even my mother, who typically filled conversational lulls with practiced efficiency, seemed stunned by Grandpa William's uncharacteristic interruption. Grandpa carefully folded his napkin and placed it beside his plate. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. When he looked up, his eyes held a sharpness that belied his 88 years. "I've sat at this table for decades," he began, listening to discussions about success, about proper careers, about what constitutes a worthwhile life. He paused, his gaze sweeping across each family member. "And I've remained silent far too long." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, if you're tired, we can continue this another." "I'm not tired, Robert," Grandpa cut him off with surprising firmness. "At least, not in the way you mean." He turned to address the entire table. "I'd like to ask all of you a question that, surprisingly, none of you has ever asked me. Have you ever wondered where this family's wealth began?" Confused glances circulated around the table. The origin of the Miller family fortune was taken as gospel. Grandpa William had built a successful architectural firm in the post-war boom, designing commercial buildings throughout New England. His business acumen had set the foundation for the family's prosperity, which my father had then expanded through shrewd investments. "You were an architect," my father said, his tone suggesting this was common knowledge. "You built Miller and Associates from nothing." Grandpa nodded slowly. "Yes, I was an architect. But that's not where our family money came from, at least, not most of it." He reached for his wallet, removed a small key, and placed it on the table. "Jessica, would you be kind enough to go to my room? In my suitcase, there's a leather portfolio. This key will open it." Confused but intrigued, I nodded and left the dining room. Grandpa always stayed in the same guest room when he visited, a space my mother had decorated in muted blues and grays that she deemed appropriately masculine for an elderly gentleman. In his neatly organized suitcase, I found an expensive-looking leather portfolio secured with a small brass lock. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a collection of photographs, news clippings, and what appeared to be gallery announcements dating back to the 1950s and 60s. When I returned to the dining room, the tension was palpable. No one had touched their dessert. Grandpa sat patiently at his end of the table, seemingly comfortable with the uncomfortable silence he had created. I handed him the portfolio, but he gestured for me to keep it. "Show them," he said quietly. With trembling hands, I opened the portfolio and spread its contents on the cleared center of the dining table. Dozens of yellowed newspaper clippings, gallery invitations, and photographs spilled out. In each one, a younger version of Grandpa William stood beside striking, modernist paintings that bore his signature. "I don't understand," my father said, picking up a review from the New York Times dated 1958. "William Miller's bold canvases demand attention in his third solo exhibition at Hartman Gallery." "You are a painter?" my mother asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Grandpa's eyes met mine across the table, a lifetime of understanding passing between us. "I wasn't just a painter," he said. "I was an artist." He gestured toward a newspaper clipping my father was examining. "That exhibition sold out in 3 days. By the time I was 40, my paintings were hanging in the homes of industrialists, celebrities, and museums." My brother Michael picked up a black and white photograph showing a younger Grandpa William in a paint-splattered studio, surrounded by large abstract canvases. "But you never mentioned this. Ever." "No," Grandpa agreed. "I didn't." He turned to my father. "Robert, do you remember the painting in my study that you admired as a boy? The one with the red slashes and blue geometric forms?" My father nodded slowly. The one you said was by W.A. Miller. You always told me it was a good investment. It was, Grandpa said with a small smile. Since I was the artist, it cost me only canvas and paint. That painting's sister piece sold at auction last year for $1.2 million. A collective gasp swept through the room. The landscape in your living room, Diane, Grandpa continued, addressing my mother. The one you proudly tell guests was acquired from a famous gallery in New York? I painted it in 1962. The seascape in your vacation home, Susan? Mine. The abstract in your office, Tom? Also mine. He looked around the table at the stunned faces of our family. This house, the summer home, the seed money for Robert's investment career, Michael's education, all of it came primarily from my art, not my architecture practice. But why the secrecy? My father asked, looking genuinely perplexed. If you were successful, why not tell us? Grandpa's expression softened with a sadness that made him suddenly look his age. Because my father, your grandfather, Robert, told me that art wasn't a respectable profession for a man with a family. He forced me to study architecture instead. He reached across the table and gently took one of the gallery announcements, running his finger over the embossed lettering. I built the architecture firm to please him, to have what he called a proper profession. But I never stopped painting. I just separated those worlds. I signed my paintings as W.A. Miller to keep my art career separate from the business world. Over time, as my paintings gained recognition, I established a reputation in the art world while maintaining my respected position in the business community. He looked directly at me now, his eyes bright with emotion. Until Jessica came along, I thought the artistic talent in our family had died with me. I felt tears welling in my eyes as decades of misunderstanding suddenly clarified. The first time I saw Jessica drawing, she couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. I recognized something I hadn't seen since my own childhood. That complete absorption, that innate understanding of composition and color. That spark. Grandpa reached into the portfolio and pulled out a small childish drawing of a cat, clearly preserved with care. With a jolt, I recognized my own early work. You kept that? I whispered. I've kept all of them, he said gently. Every drawing you've ever given me. He turned to face the rest of the family, his voice growing stronger. For years, I've watched all of you dismiss Jessica's talent and passion, just as my father dismissed mine. The difference is I gave in. I lived a divided life to please others. Jessica has had the courage to pursue her art openly, despite your constant disapproval. The silence around the table was absolute. My mother stared at the gallery clippings, my father examined the photograph of Grandpa's studio, and Michael kept looking between Grandpa and me as if seeing us both for the first time. But your architecture firm was successful, my father finally said. You won awards, had major commissions. Yes, Grandpa acknowledged. Because I worked hard at it. But it was never what made my soul come alive. He looked at me again. It was never what made me feel the way I feel when I watched Jessica talk about her designs. Aunt Susan picked up a small news clipping. This says your work is in the Modern Museum of Art. We've been there dozens of times. How do we never know? You never looked at the plaques, Grandpa said simply. People seldom do. The revelation hung in the air like suspended dust motes, illuminated and impossible to ignore. Grandpa William reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim tablet, a surprising sight from a man who still preferred physical books and handwritten letters. Technology has its benefits, he said with a slight smile, noticing my surprised expression. Especially for keeping up with a granddaughter's career. With practiced ease that belied his age, he tapped the screen several times before turning it around to show the family. On the display was a professional-looking digital portfolio, my portfolio, organized by project and client, with detailed descriptions and outcomes. This is Jessica's work from the past 3 years, he explained. I've followed every project, every publication, every award. He scrolled through the images, stopping on the packaging design that had won the Regional Design Excellence Award I'd tried to mention earlier. This design increased the client's sales by 32%, he said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he must have used in boardrooms decades ago. It was selected from over 300 submissions by a panel of international design experts. My mother leaned forward, examining the design with new interest. "You did this, Jessica?" Before I could answer, Grandpa continued scrolling, stopping at an editorial spread I'd created for a major magazine. This campaign for sustainable fashion was featured in Communication Arts, the most prestigious design publication in the industry. He looked up at my relatives. That's like getting into the New England Journal of Medicine for a doctor or Harvard Law Review for an attorney. Uncle Tom adjusted his glasses, studying the screen with reluctant interest. "But how do you have all this?" I asked Grandpa, bewildered by his detailed knowledge of my professional history. A small, mischievous smile crossed his face. "Did you ever wonder how your work was featured in Design Quarterly last spring? The magazine that rarely showcases designers under 30. My jaw dropped. "That was you?" But the email said they discovered my work through an anonymous submission, he finished. "I've been following your career since you graduated, Jessica. Not interfering, you've earned every opportunity on your own merit, but occasionally opening doors that might have remained closed to someone your age." He turned to face the rest of the family. "Jessica has extraordinary talent. The kind that comes along rarely. The kind that changes how people see the world." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "If she's so successful, why isn't she making more money?" Grandpa's expression hardened slightly. "Because, Robert, the world undervalues art, just as this family has. And because building a reputation in creative fields takes time." He fixed my father with a pointed look. "Didn't you lose money your first 3 years in business before your investments matured?" My father didn't answer. Grandpa turned back to his tablet and opened another application. "Which brings me to my next point." He slid the tablet toward me. On the screen was a legal document with the heading William Arthur Miller Foundation for the Arts. "I established this foundation last year," he explained. "Its mission is to support emerging artists whose work focuses on sustainability and social impact, Jessica's exact specialization." I scanned the document, my heart racing as I realized what I was reading. "The foundation is funded with an endowment of $12 million, Grandpa continued calmly, as though he weren't dropping a bombshell. "And Jessica is named as both the primary beneficiary and the future director." Gasps echoed around the table. My mother's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "Additionally," Grandpa said, retrieving his tablet and opening another document, "I've established a trust fund for Jessica that will provide her with a quarterly income while she continues to build her design practice. This isn't charity, it's an investment in extraordinary talent, the same investment I wish someone had made in me when I was struggling to balance art and practicality." "Grandpa," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied gently. "Just promise you'll never compromise your vision the way I did." He turned to address the entire table, his voice gaining strength with each word. "This family has achieved financial success, yes. But somewhere along the way, you began to measure human worth by income and status rather than passion and purpose." His eyes settled on my father. "Robert, do you remember when you wanted to play jazz? You had real talent on the saxophone." My father's face flushed. I had never heard about any musical aspirations. "And Diane," Grandpa continued, looking at my mother, "you once told your mother you wanted to design clothing. You used to sketch dresses during school." My mother looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. "Michael," Grandpa said, turning to my brother, "Jessica told me about your interest in music composition. That you still write songs but never play them for anyone." Michael shot me a betrayed look, but I shook my head. "I never told him that," I said quietly. Grandpa smiled sadly. "You didn't have to. I recognized the signs of buried passion. I lived with it for decades." He gestured toward the portfolio of his art career, now spread across the dining table. "I achieved success by conventional standards. I built buildings, made money, raised a family, earned respect in the community. But I kept my true passion, my art, separate, almost secret. I divided myself in a way I would wish on no one." He reached across the table and took my hand. "When Jessica showed artistic talent, I promised myself I would support her in ways my father never supported me. I've been quietly watching, waiting for the right moment to step in. All those times you took me to museums, I said, memories flooding back. The art books you gave me for birthdays. The summer you insisted I attend that design workshop. Small nudges, he acknowledged. I didn't want to be obvious about it. A strange, choked sound made us all turn toward my father. To my shock, his eyes were wet. You never told me, he said to Grandpa, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. All these years, I thought I was following in your footsteps, making you proud by continuing the family business tradition. You did make me proud, Robert, Grandpa said gently. But not because you chose business. You made me proud when you worked hard, when you treated people fairly, when you provided for your family. I would have been equally proud had you pursued music, or teaching, or any path that brought you fulfillment. But you encouraged me toward business, my father insisted. No, Grandpa corrected. I accepted your choice of business. There's a difference. When you showed interest in the firm, I supported you because it seemed to be what you wanted. What I failed to do was create an environment where you felt free to choose differently. He looked around the table. That's the mistake this family continues to make. You've confused support with approval, success with conformity. In the silence that followed, I studied the faces of my family members, shocked, confused, some defensive, others thoughtful. For the first time, I saw them not as judges of my life choices, but as people who had perhaps made compromises I knew nothing about. The dining room remained eerily still. The expensive candles my mother had carefully selected for the table had burned down considerably, pools of wax forming around their bases. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, and our reflections stared back at us from the windows like judgmental ghosts. I took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside me, a lifetime of defensive posturing giving way to a strange new confidence. For the first time at this table, I didn't feel like the family disappointment. I felt seen. I've spent years trying to make you understand my choices, I said, breaking the silence. Every holiday, every family gathering, I've arrived with new accomplishments to share, hoping this would be the time you finally took my career seriously. I looked around at their faces, still processing Grandpa's revelation, still recalibrating their understanding of family history. Do you know what it's like to win an award your peers consider prestigious, only to have your own family change the subject when you mention it? To have clients praise your work while your parents introduce you as still figuring things out? My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I continued. When I was 7, I spent weeks on a watercolor for the school art show. Dad, you glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds before asking why I wasn't in the math club instead. Mom, when I got accepted to Rhode Island School of Design, one of the top art schools in the country, you told relatives I was taking some time to explore options. I turned to my brother. Michael, when I landed my first major client 2 years ago, you asked if they were paying me in exposure instead of money. When I tried to explain the project's creative challenges, you checked sports scores on your phone. Michael had the grace to look embarrassed. Each of you has, in your own way, made me feel that my passion was frivolous, that my career was a phase I needed to outgrow. Do you have any idea what that does to someone's confidence? Their sense of self-worth. We were concerned about your security, my mother said defensively. Your future. No, I countered. You were concerned about appearances. About having a daughter who fit neatly into your narrative of success. That's not fair, my father interjected. We've supported you financially when you needed it. Money isn't support, Dad. Not the kind that matters. I needed you to believe in me. To respect my choice even if you didn't understand it. I turned to Grandpa William, whose eyes shone with unmistakable pride. Apparently, one person in this family did. And he was the only one who never made me feel I needed to justify my existence at this table. An uncomfortable silence fell. My brother Michael was the first to respond, his tone defensive. Come on, Jess. You're being melodramatic. We tease everyone in this family. No, Michael, you don't. You tease me. You celebrate each other's accomplishments in the approved fields, law, medicine, finance. But my achievements have always been treated as amusing anecdotes at best, concerning failures at worst. That's not true, he insisted. Remember when you designed that logo for my friend's startup? I told everyone about that. Yes, because it intersected with the business world you respect. But when my work is purely creative, you dismiss it. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with her napkin. Jessica, I had no idea you felt this way. We only want what's best for you. What's best for me is what fulfills me, I said firmly. What's best for me is creating work that matters, that communicates, that solves problems beautifully. What's best for me is being true to my talents, not contorting myself to fit someone else's definition of success. I gestured toward Grandpa's portfolio, still spread across the table. Grandpa achieved conventional success while keeping his true passion separate. He lived a divided life. I refuse to do that, and you've punished me for it at every turn. My father, uncharacteristically silent until now, cleared his throat. Jessica, your grandfather has given us all a lot to think about tonight. Perhaps I haven't been as understanding as I should have been. The admission, however minimal, was so unexpected that I nearly didn't register it. The truth is, he continued with visible discomfort, I don't understand the creative world. I don't understand how someone builds a career in it. I understand numbers, markets, concrete outcomes. Your world seems intangible to me. It's not intangible to my clients, I replied, or to the people who experience my designs. Just because you can't measure creativity on a spreadsheet doesn't make it less valuable. I'm beginning to see that, he said quietly. Grandpa William, who had been watching our exchange with careful attention, spoke up. The tragedy of our family isn't that we lack talent, clearly we don't. The tragedy is that we've created an environment where only certain talents are celebrated, where success has been narrowly defined by income and status. He looked at my father. Robert, I watched you abandon music because my father, your grandfather, convinced me it wasn't a viable path. I didn't have the courage to contradict him. That's my greatest regret. I barely remember playing anymore, my father said softly. But you do remember how it felt, don't you? Grandpa asked. The way time disappeared when you were lost in a piece of music? A flicker of recognition crossed my father's face. That's what Jessica experiences when she's designing, Grandpa continued. That total immersion, that sense of rightness. Would you deny her that feeling because it doesn't fit our family's narrow definition of success? My father didn't answer, but his expression suggested Grandpa's words had landed. I don't need your approval, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I've built a career I'm proud of without it. What I wanted, what I deserved, was your respect. Aunt Susan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. Jessica, I owe you an apology. I've been dismissive of your work because I didn't understand it. Perhaps I still don't, but I'm beginning to understand that my ignorance doesn't diminish your accomplishment. Others around the table murmured similar sentiments, though whether from genuine realization or social pressure was hard to determine. Throughout this exchange, Grandpa William watched with the serene expression of someone who had waited decades for this moment of truth. When there was a natural pause in the conversation, he spoke again. Art and commerce have always existed in tension, he said thoughtfully. But they need not be enemies. In fact, the most extraordinary innovations often happen at their intersection. He smiled at me. Jessica understands this. Her work bridges beauty and function, creativity and practicality. He turned to address the entire table. The real purpose of wealth of privilege should be to free the next generation to pursue meaning, not just money. To contribute something unique to the world, not just accumulate status symbols. As the evening light faded outside the dining room windows, our family sat in a silence unlike any I could remember, not the tense silence of suppressed judgment, but the thoughtful quiet of genuine reflection. The perfect Thanksgiving dinner my mother had orchestrated had evolved into something entirely unexpected, a moment of truth that had been generations in the making. 1 year later, I stood in the center of the Hartman Gallery in downtown Boston, surrounded by the fruits of my labor. The white walls displayed my most ambitious project to date, a series of mixed-media pieces combining digital design, traditional painting techniques, and sustainable materials to tell stories of environmental renewal. The gallery buzzed with opening night energy, art critics with notebooks, designers taking inspiration, collectors evaluating purchases, and ordinary people simply experiencing the work. In the corner, a small plaque acknowledged the William Arthur Miller Foundation for the Arts, which had provided the grant that made this exhibition possible. Grandpa William stood beside me, his blue eyes bright with pride. At 89, he moved more slowly now, but his mind remained sharp as ever. In the past year, he had become not just my grandfather, but my mentor, my confidant, and my most trusted advisor. "They're coming," he said quietly, nodding toward the gallery entrance. My heart quickened as I spotted them, my parents entering tentatively, looking slightly out of place among the artistic crowd. My father wore a suit as always, but my mother had traded her usual conservative attire for something more colorful. Behind them came Michael and Amanda, then Aunt Susan and Uncle Tom, and several cousins. This wasn't the first time I'd seen them since last Thanksgiving's revelations, but it was the first time they'd all come to one of my professional events. My mother reached me first, embracing me with uncharacteristic emotion. "The place is packed," she whispered. "And your work. It's extraordinary, Jessica." "Thanks, Mom," I said, returning her hug and realizing I meant it. My father stood awkwardly before my largest piece, a complex design combining traditional painting with digital elements and sustainable materials. "I don't pretend to understand all of this," he said, gesturing toward the artwork. "But it's clearly important. People are talking about it like it matters." "It does matter," I said simply. He nodded, a small but significant acknowledgement. "Your grandfather explained some of the techniques to me last week. The way you've integrated traditional methods with new technology, it's innovative." Coming from my father, innovative was high praise indeed. Michael approached next, studying another piece with genuine interest. "This is really something, Jess. That sustainable clothing brand you designed for last year, they're featuring your new packaging design in Time magazine next month. Did you know?" My colleague showed me the advance copy. "I didn't know," I said, surprised not by the news, but by the fact that Michael had bothered to mention it. "It's a big deal," he said, meeting my eyes directly. "You're making waves in your industry. I should have recognized that sooner." The evening continued with a strange new dynamic, my family asking genuine questions about my work, listening to my answers, introducing themselves proudly to my colleagues as Jessica's family. Small steps, perhaps, but meaningful ones. During a quiet moment, Grandpa William joined me by the refreshment table. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Surreal," I admitted. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined them here, actually engaging with my work. "People can change," he said, "when they're given the opportunity to see things differently." I watched as my mother earnestly questioned one of the gallery curators about an installation technique. Some more than others, apparently. Grandpa chuckled. "Your mother called me last week to ask about art investment. She's considering collecting emerging artists." I nearly choked on my sparkling water. "You're kidding." "Not at all. She's even taking an art appreciation course at the community college." He smiled wryly. "Don't expect miracles." She still asked if there were good returns in the art market, but it's a start. As the evening progressed, I found myself standing beside my father near the gallery's large windows overlooking the Boston skyline. "The William Arthur Miller Foundation is making quite a name for itself," he said. 3 major grants this year, a scholarship program, that residency in Providence. Grandpa had been planning it for years, I explained. He wanted to create opportunities for artists that he never had. My father nodded, his gaze fixed on the city lights. "He showed me his studio last month. I'd never seen it before." "Really? I thought you grew up visiting it." "No," he said quietly. "That part of his life was separate. Until now." A contemplative silence fell between us. "I've been thinking about the saxophone," he finally said. "About getting one again." The simple statement carried weight far beyond its words. "You should," I encouraged. "Grandpa says you were really good." "I doubt I remember anything," he said with a small, self-conscious laugh. "You don't have to be good at something to find joy in it, Dad." He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. That's a wisdom I'm only beginning to understand. Across the room, I spotted Grandpa William engaged in animated conversation with several young artists from the Foundation's mentorship program. Despite his age, he stood tall, gesturing expressively as he spoke about technique and vision. In his element, he appeared decades younger. The past year had transformed him as much as it had the rest of the family. Free from decades of secrecy, he had embraced his identity as an artist publicly. A retrospective of his work was planned for the Museum of Fine Arts next spring, a culmination of his recently acknowledged career. As the evening drew to a close, we gathered for a group photograph. A rare moment with every family member present. As we arranged ourselves, I noticed something different about our configuration. Rather than being relegated to the periphery as in past family photos, I stood in the center beside Grandpa William, my work providing the backdrop. Before we leave, Grandpa announced to our family group, "I'd like to say something." He raised his glass of sparkling cider. To Jessica, who had the courage to pursue her passion openly, despite obstacles. And to the Miller family, who is finally learning that success has many definitions, all of them valid. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the gallery staff began closing up, I found myself alone with Grandpa William in front of my central piece, a mixed media exploration of hidden talents emerging into light. "Do you think things will really change?" I asked him. "Or is this just a temporary adjustment because of your revelation?" He considered the question thoughtfully. "Change isn't a destination, Jessica. It's a process. Your parents, your brother, they're beginning that process. Some days will be better than others. And the foundation? Being its director eventually, that's a huge responsibility. One you're ready for," he said confidently. "Not today, perhaps, but soon." You've always understood what I only realized late in life, that art isn't separate from real work. It is real work. Essential work. He placed his hand gently on my shoulder. The greatest gift we can offer the world is our authentic self, not the self others expect us to be, but the person we truly are, with all our unique talents and perspectives. I thought about the long journey that had brought me to this moment, the years of dismissal and doubt, the struggle to believe in my path when no one else seemed to. And I thought about the single lifeline that had sustained me, Grandpa William's quiet, consistent belief in my vision. "Thank you," I said simply, "for seeing me when no one else did." "We recognize in others what we know in ourselves," he replied. "I always saw you, Jessica, because in many ways, I was seeing myself." As we left the gallery together, stepping into the cool Boston evening, I felt a sense of peace I'd never known at family gatherings. The road ahead wouldn't be perfect, old habits and expectations wouldn't disappear overnight, but something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to justify my existence at the family table. I was standing firmly in my truth, supported not just by Grandpa's revelation, but by my own hard-won accomplishments. I realized then that the greatest gift isn't having everyone understand your path, it's finding the courage to walk it anyway, and recognizing the ones who walk alongside you, even when the journey seems impossible. Has your family ever misunderstood your passion or dreams? Has someone special stood by you when others didn't? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding your authentic path. Remember, sometimes the person who believes in you the most might be the one you least expect. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the courage to follow your true calling.